world is overflowing with haunted houses, but some are definitely scarier than others. While some houses simply hold spirits stuck in this realm, there are some that are truly believed to house demonic entities capable of possessing anyone they choose. Welcome back everyone, thanks for tuning in to another video. My name is Kennedy and today we are talking about one of my favorite things, haunted houses. So buckle up because these are the top 10 haunted houses that terrified its owners. Starting us off at number 10 is the Smurl Family. Between the years of 1974 to 1989, the Smurl family was subjected to some incredibly terrifying hauntings in their Pennsylvania home. Over the 15 years they lived here, Jack and Janet Smurl, along with the rest of the family, reported that their TV once burst into flames, their toilets would flush themselves, and that various electronics would stop working for no reason all the time. But it was at night that the family got truly terrified. They would hear the loud footsteps despite there never being an intruder, and a nauseating smell always filled the house, but only ever at night. Soon enough, things got even scarier. They began finding what appeared to be claw marks all over the bathroom, and then in 1985, a full-bodied apparition began haunting the halls and hovering over them while they were sleeping. The family named her Old Hag, and it seems that after a while, the demon got bored of just watching the couple sleep, and so it began harassing them, and according to Janet, would routinely commit SA on both her and her husband. That was the final straw for the couple, and so they decided to bring in a priest to exorcise the demon out. But even after 50 exorcisms, the entity refused to tighten its grip on the house. So, fearing for their lives, the family finally moved out in 1989 and never looked back. Moving on to number 9, the Snekdar Family. In the 1980s, the Snekdar family thought they had found the perfect home. But it wasn't until after they were all settled that they learned the house had operated as a mortuary for several decades since the 1920s. At first, everything seemed alright, but soon they discovered old equipment from the funeral home in their basement. This raised an eyebrow, but they brushed it off and didn't think much of it. That was until they uncovered that their backyard still contained many of the buried corpses, along with eerie photographs of the corpses hidden away in nooks and crannies. Soon they were being haunted by evil spirits, routinely hearing haunting noises, and even seeing full-bodied apparitions. The mother claims that when she would mop the basement, the water would turn red as if it were blood, or that she would catch objects flying around the room while lights would aggressively flicker. At that time, there were rumors circulating that the former funeral directors were guilty of necrophilia, which led to the house becoming haunted by an evil presence, seeking revenge on all that lived in the house. Moving on to number 8. The Cranmer Family. Despite his wife's hesitance, Bob Cranmer was determined to buy his dream home and moved in with his family in 1988. However, it quickly became apparent they had moved into a house of horrors. Cranmer says that over the years he would watch helplessly as blood dripped from his walls and invisible hands assaulted him and his family, fearing each day that it might be his last. And finally, after 18 years, an exorcism in 2006 finally drove the demon away. But where did the haunting begin? Well, Cranmer believes it all started with Dr. James Mahan, a former tenant of the home. Dr. Mahan was an alcoholic who routinely performed illegal operations on women in his basement, but not because he was looking to help these women, because he had a deal with a demon. Cranmer says the demon who haunts the house is Moloch, a demon who feeds off of young sacrifices, and that Moloch had possessed Dr. Mahan in order to feed off his basement operations. Once Dr. Mahan died, there was no one left to please the demon, and so he tormented all the families who moved in after, hoping to be able to scare them into giving him what he wanted. Luckily, Mr. Cranmer was able to rid the house of Moloch, and his family escaped the torment. Moving on to number 7, Ghost. Next we have a story that was actually posted to BuzzFeed, and I will just let them tell their terrifying experience. Quote, "When I I was like 5 years old, my parents bought this huge house in a small town. We only lived in the house for 5 months before it unexpectedly burned down. When we first moved in, it was a 2-story creaky old house. I remember feeling uncomfortable there and didn't understand why. I always made sure to stay with someone, never alone. Around 2 weeks before it burned down, I saw a dark shadow walking through the hallway outside of my bedroom. Needless to say, I was terrified. After the house burned down, my stepdad still wanted to make use of the property, so he built a 1-story home. I still felt weird vibes from the new house, but it was not as intense as the old house was. One night when I was only 7 or 8 years old, I woke up, looked straight ahead, and saw a little boy wearing a white shirt with overalls. We made eye contact, and then he disappeared. Fast forward to 10 years later, my younger nephew was having problems sleeping. We all talked to him to figure out why he was reacting this way, and he explained that there was a little boy wearing a white shirt with overalls who kept bothering him and wanted to play. He even said the boy would pretend to shoot at him as if they were playing cops and robbers. In that moment, my blood ran cold. I had never told anyone about my experience. Next up at number 6, Tony and Debra. In 1992, owners Tony and Debra Pickman came forward saying that they began experiencing very strange things in their home after the birth of their daughter. What was once a completely normal home was suddenly infested by a demonic entity, covering the couple in scratch marks, cuts, and bruises nearly every day. On top of that, they were seeing full apparitions of the demons, objects floating around their house, and hearing strange demonic noises at all hours of the day. It got so bad they contacted investigators who attempted to reach the spirits and reason with them, but the investigators were also tormented by the entity. Eventually they came to realize that Sally, the house's most active ghost, had died here when she was young from a botched appendectomy. Initially they thought she was the demon, but they found out she had actually become a magnet for dark entities to pass through, almost like a portal for demons to enter their house. By 1994, they had enough and moved out of the horrible house, but have since maintained a website dedicated to their experience there. Moving on to number 5, Latoya Ammons. When Latoya Ammons moved into her quaint home in Gary, Indiana in 2011, she had no clue what was in store for her and her family. According to Latoya, things got bad quickly. The first troubling phenomenon occurred when a huge swarm of large black flies started circling the family's screened-in porch, and only seemed to be multiplying. These flies were relentless, even staying through the winter, and as soon as they arrived, so did the sound of strange footsteps at night. Then one day, Latoya saw a shadow figure walk across her living room, and she began to panic. Something evil was in her home. It all came to a head after Latoya witnessed her unconscious 12-year-old levitating above her bed at 2 a.m., and so she contacted some clairvoyants to try and rid whatever evil spirit was living in her home. According to the paranormal experts, Latoya's home was haunted by an astonishing 200 demons, and was indeed a very dangerous place for her and her family to be living. Latoya decided the best course of action was to undergo exorcisms to rid themselves of anything the demons could have placed on them and flee their home. All I can say is thank God they got out alive. Moving on to number 4, the cage. During the 16th century, this house was used to imprison 12 accused witches, one of whom was the famous Ursula Kemp, who was tragically executed for her so-called witchy ways. Whether that is all coincidence or not is up for debate, but according to the 2004 owner Vanessa Mitchell, it is a very haunted home filled with deep-seated evil. Vanessa claims the demons wasted no time introducing themselves. The first night she moved in, she saw a shadowy figure in the corner and knew right away that something was very wrong. Shortly after, she began to feel harassed by the entity, as it would push when she was home alone, smack her hard enough to leave bruises, and even shoved Vanessa down the stairs. Then she began seeing strange things too. Bloodstains started showing up on the floors all the time, and objects began launching themselves across the room. Whatever it was, it did not want her there. In an interview, she states that during her 3-year time living in the cage, she witnessed 4 ghosts, 2 men and 1 woman, which she claims she once captured on camera. Thankfully, she got out, but the house remains a notorious spot in Essex, frequented by paranormal enthusiasts hoping to catch a glimpse of the evil entity that nearly killed Vanessa. Moving on to number 3. the Armstrong Street House. In 1970, Anne and Roger Brock moved their family into a beautiful 4-bedroom house in Kokomo, Indiana. The family didn't have a ton of money, but they were able to score the house for pretty cheap, which in hindsight could have been a clue. Mere hours after the family moved in, they began to notice oddities like flickering lights, but brushed it off as nothing. Then one night, one of the daughters, Lana, was awoken by sudden shaking. She thought it was an earthquake at first, but then she looked out her window to see a strange man, drenched, staring at her through her bedroom window. Lana freaked out, but then in the blink of an eye, he disappeared. Another night, she heard a knock at her door, and assuming it was her parents, she went to answer it, only to have her mouth covered by an invisible hand. She tried to scream but couldn't. Suddenly her dog appeared and distracted the entity, allowing Lana to scream for help, but this only angered the spirit. To get back at her, it picked up the dog and threw it out the window, sending it plunging to its death. This went on nearly every night. Years later, they learned that someone was killed in the house, which could explain their torment, but still not a single member of the family has ever dared return. Coming in at number 2, the House of Death. Once the home of actress and poet Jan Bryant Bartell in the 60s, this house holds a reputation for housing some of the most demonic entities in all of New York City. Within weeks of moving in, Jan knew something was deeply wrong with the house. She would often feel the touch of an icy hand across the back of her neck or hear footsteps follow her around the empty house. The house always reeked like something was rotting or dying, and her dogs were always barking into nothingness. Then one day, one of her dogs died, as if out of nowhere. So she decided to take matters into her own hands and called a psychic medium. But this only angered the demons. During the first session, the medium went into an unusual trance, speaking about the hundreds of bodies buried underneath the house. And Jan knew it wasn't the medium speaking. It was then that she learned how many people had been killed or taken their own lives while living here. Then all of a sudden, the medium's eyes bulged out of her head and she started shouting that she would never leave in a deep demonic voice. The encounter was enough for Jan to leave and never return. But sadly, a few years later, she published a book about her life in the haunted house just weeks before she took her own life. And last up in our number 1 spot, Jeanine and AJ. Back in 2013, a couple named Jeanine and AJ moved into a quaint and sweet little house in Springfield, Louisiana. The haunting started off small, with their radio turning on all by itself or the lights flickering independently, but soon enough they overheard their son speak to who he described as an imaginary friend late at night, and they heard a strange voice threaten to begin hurting Jeanine. Before long, Jeanine was being harmed by the presence, waking up to find bruises and scratches, and would often get pushed around by the demon in the middle of the day. She began noticing that the rosaries she hung were spinning in the house, plaster was falling from the ceiling and missing her by mere inches, and soon she began to seriously fear for her life. One day her and her husband decided to leave out a tape recorder to see if they could get any proof of the demon occupying their house. And sure enough, when they went to check the recorder the next day, they captured growling sounds and the demon saying, "She will die." The last straw was when they moved a rug in one of the rooms, only to discover that the floor had been covered entirely in satanic symbols. Needless to say, they packed up everything and got the hell out of there. Well, that's all I have for you today, friends. Let me know in the comments below if you have ever lived in a haunted house and were any as terrifying as the ones on this list. I'll see you next time!